You know, I've always wondered if you could make your own pool float, and I've also wondered what it's like to be a hot dog. So today, I made an inflatable hot dog bun, and I'm gonna be the hot dog. Oh, nothing. So for like 5 or 6 years now, I've been really interested in building a custom inflatable, something that I could lay on and float across a pool, but I haven't done it for one big reason. It turns out that most people don't make their own pool inflatables, and that means there's not a lot of information on the internet about how to do it, what to use, what kind of adhesive to use, what kind of seams you have to make. And so I just really haven't had the right information. But it's summertime, so I'm deciding to just bite the bullet, use the very little bit of information I have, and just experiment and see what we can come up with. So I've got 2 big goals for this video as of now. My first goal is that I want to make something that can hold air, something that was sealed up, you can inflate, and it will have pressure on the inside of it to keep it out of the water. The second thing is it needs to keep me out of the water. It needs to be strong enough, pressurized enough that it will keep me afloat so that I can kind of float across the pool. Those are pretty lofty goals, so first we're gonna start small. The first kind of important thing to figure out is what material to use, and I can't really find a whole lot of specific information about it. Everything just says vinyl or PVC coated vinyl or some variation like that, but I can't find any sources to buy it in the same way that the companies buy it to make inflatables. So I went to the local fabric store and got some marine vinyl, and we're gonna start here. I did find a few cool videos talking about seams, about how to overlap the pieces or wrap the pieces around each other to get them to stay together, but you still gotta bind them together. And that brought me to figuring out whether I should use heat or adhesives. For the heat option, I found a little tiny iron. This is for molding leather and materials like that. The cool thing about it is that it's really thin, so I can just heat along a seam to actually melt the 2 pieces of plastic together, theoretically. Now, to talk about adhesives, I first have to tell you a very strange but absolutely true story. Check this out. A few weeks back, I went to Amazon to order some vinyl adhesive because I figured that would be a good way to stick 2 pieces together. And literally, the next day, before that cement showed up, I got an email from a company that makes vinyl cement saying that they had a new one out and they wanted to sponsor a video using that cement. At first I thought it was like spam or some sort of a scam or something, but it turns out it wasn't the same company. These people had no idea that I had just ordered vinyl cement, and their brand new vinyl cement I think is gonna work perfectly for this. And so even though I was gonna make this video anyway, I just have the opportunity for it to be sponsored by Rockford, which is really, really cool. So they sent me some of this vinyl cement plus. It's a new product. We're gonna try it out and see if I can use it to make a custom inflatable. And trust me, I understand that there will be some cynical people who don't think that that's a true scenario. It is very, very strange on timing, but it's the truth. And regardless, here we are, and we have an opportunity to test heat and adhesive on the marine vinyl. Let's give it a shot. Did you see that? I glued these 2 pieces together and then pulled them apart, and it ripped right past the glue line. This section right here is where all the glue is, and it just ripped the plastic before it ripped the glue. So I think that's gonna work pretty well. And as far as the iron, it didn't work at all. It was either way too hot to where it melted the plastic completely, or not hot enough to where I could really easily rip it apart. So luckily, Rockford sponsored this video because their product actually works really well. So now that we know that the adhesive is the way to stick this stuff together, I want to make something that I can inflate. So I think I'm just going to cut out 2 little rectangles, glue them together to make like a pillow shape, something that I can inflate to make sure that it will hold air. But we also have to figure out a way to get air into it. And that brings us to one of the other things that was hard to order and find because I didn't know what to call it. It's actually called a mouth valve, which makes a whole lot of sense. But it's the little thing you blow into to inflate something. Now these are the only ones that I could find that I could purchase within a reasonable amount of time. I got them from eBay and I had to buy 10 at a time. I haven't been able to find the clear ones yet, so if you have a source for them, let me know. And this material definitely feels a little bit different than the clear marine vinyl that I got, even though it was listed as vinyl. So hopefully the vinyl cement will stick them together. Turns out it's really hard to film clear things. Who knew? Again, this video is sponsored by Rockford and their Vinyl Cement Plus, so that's what I'm gonna use, but I wanna just briefly talk about how to use it. It's very, very simple. Basically, it's a two-part cement, like a contact cement, and you put it onto the two surfaces pretty liberally, and then let it dry. That's the way that this cement and all contact cements work. You put it on two surfaces and let it dry, and then after both sides are completely dry, when you stick them together, they form a really strong bond. Reading the instructions for this, they also talked about maybe putting on multiple coats to get an even stronger bond, and in my test, I only did one, and it was really, really strong, so I don't know if that's necessary or not. As it's starting to dry out, you can see that it's turning white in some areas, and then once it gets completely dry, it clears out. But you can see that it's actually working. I also wanted to point out that for this test, I only put it on 3 sides. I left one side open because I'm gonna try to kind of make a sleeve and then turn it inside out before I glued the final pieces together so that the seam is on the inside. I'm imagining that's gonna be really difficult to do, but I think in the end, that probably would be the best way to do it because you won't have sharp edges exposed and all the seams will be inside, which will stop them from being torn apart, I think. Oh, another thing while I'm waiting on it to dry. Putting this stuff together is gonna be a little bit difficult because it's got all these folds in it. So I'm gonna take this and lay it out in the sun for just a few minutes and see if that helps kind of smooth it out and flatten it. For next time, it would make a lot more sense to cut the hole for this valve before I glue the pieces together rather than after, but I'm gonna make it work. Okay, let's see if we can get this thing turned inside out. Turning that inside out actually worked way better than I expected it to. And if this stuff turns out to be airtight and watertight, I think you could actually use this same process to make dry bags. Like if you wanted to take something with you when you went kayaking or canoeing or something like that, you could make a bag to do that. You just have to figure out a good way to seal it up. I've still got to seal up this outside edge, and I want to try something a little bit different. Rather than just folding it inward, I'm gonna put some cement in here, seal it down, and then put some cement on the top and fold it over. So we'll have 2 layers of sealant there. We'll see if that's necessary or helpful. All right, we have test number 1. I have no idea if it's sealed up, but there's only one way to find out. It's inflated, which is cool, but now I gotta see if there's any leaks in it. So it looks like there's some tiny leaks in my little overlap here. Maybe the first pass didn't get it closed up well enough, but the inside out seams, I think, are perfect. I can definitely feel the air coming out in a couple of these spots, so I'm just gonna try to fill them in just for the sake of the prototype, just to see if I can actually get it to seal up. I fixed one of them, but the other one is still there. I used a roller to really push those edges together, and it totally holds air. Our prototype absolutely works. But before we scale this up and start to try to make something really big, we've got to deal with the fact that this is clear. I did find a place on Amazon that actually sells colored vinyl. Unfortunately, it's all strips like this. There's not any big sheets. So until I find that, I'm gonna have to work with small pieces like this, or I could try to paint it. So the next test that I need to do is actually with the clear vinyl and some vinyl and fabric paint. I have no idea if this is gonna work, but it's made for spraying vinyl, so we're gonna give it a shot. Now I assume that if I make an inflatable, this painted surface needs to be on the inside because pool water and sun and friction would probably tear it off the outside, but honestly, I have no idea. In the past, I've made 2-dimensional patterns from 3-dimensional models, like from helmets and stuff that I have in front of me. But I want to make something that's really big, something I don't have to pattern. Luckily, I found a really cool free tool that makes it really, really easy. I stumbled across this tool on Reddit, and it's actually made for making a plushie pattern from a 3D object. It is super cool, and it's called Plushify. Basically, you just upload a 3D object like an OBJ file to it. It will unwrap that into 2-dimensional shapes and give you a pattern that you can print out. So here's the plan. We're gonna buy a really inexpensive model of a hot dog because, I don't know, it's funny. And then we're gonna upload it to Plushify, see if we can make some patterns, and we're gonna print them out and see if we can actually make a giant hot dog. Okay, so I just bought like 12 yards of vinyl, and let me just say this is gonna be one expensive hot dog. I went ahead and taped this thing down, then I traced the outside of it with a silver Sharpie, and that's basically just because as I start to cut the vinyl, this isn't gonna be attached to anything, so I wanna make sure that I have that shape. But I wanted to point out this little black line right here. In the software Plushify, you can set the thickness of this little piece right here. This is the overlap in material where you would sew them together. The seam would be right along this black line. Now, if you're sewing these together, I don't think you need 3/4 of an inch of material to make a seam. I don't really know. But for glue, it's actually perfect. I can set the thickness of that area, and then I know that I only have to add glue to 3/4 of an inch all the way around, and it's plenty of surface area for that cement to stick together. I had a feeling that buying the thinner material was gonna come back to bite me, and it absolutely did. Well, it looks like that thin material is so thin that putting the adhesive on the outside of it actually makes it kind of curl up as it dries, which means that all of the stuff that I just covered is curling over on itself, and that's not gonna work. I was trying to be really careful not to put too much adhesive so that it wouldn't do this, and in some places it worked fine, but in some other places it just completely curled over itself. So it looks like this expensive hot dog just got more expensive. I went back to the fabric store and got a whole roll of the thicker stuff. And it turns out that if you make any cuts to this at all, you can't return it to the store, which means I have a whole bunch of vinyl. So before I dig into the thick stuff, I wanted to try one more thing with the thin stuff. I took a piece of painter's tape and I put it on the opposite side of the plastic where I was gonna put the adhesive. Turns out that's enough to hold the plastic down and not let it wrinkle when you put the adhesive on it. So I can use the thin stuff after all, I think. Just can't use this one. I get to do some really strange stuff with this job, and this is pretty strange. I've got this about 3/4 of the way glued up. I have no idea if it's fully sealed, but before I glue the rest of it up, I've got to reach all the way down to the inside and pull the whole thing inside out. So, attempt number 3 with the thicker material kinda worked. I mean, it's got a hole in it somewhere, but it is inflated. And I was able to get it to inflate. It's just slowly started to lose that air. So I gotta go back along the seam, find out where that leak is, then use some adhesive to plug up the hole, and then hopefully the hot dog portion of this will be basically done. After just a little bit of patching, I have an inflatable that's actually holding air. Right now it does look like more of a banana than a hot dog, but eventually I'm gonna paint it kind of a red color and it'll start to look a little bit more like a hot dog. Plus, once it's in a bun, it'll make sense. Now speaking of the paint, I decided to paint it on the outside basically because of all this stuff on the inside. From the test that I did before, if I paint it on the inside, you're gonna see the gloss of the vinyl and it's gonna look like a glossy hot dog instead of a matte hot dog if you put it on the outside. I think it's actually gonna be a lot easier to paint on the outside as well because it'll cover up all the seams and the valve and anything else. But before I go through any of the painting stuff, I'm gonna go ahead and make the buns. And they're bigger. They don't have as sharp turns on the pieces, so I think they'll be easier, but you know, we'll find out. I got the pieces laid out for the buns, but before we can talk about the buns, we gotta talk more about the dog. We have a little bit of a problem. I mean, it's not a huge problem, but over the course of about 48 hours, this thing lost most of its air. It was holding it fine. I sprayed soapy water all over the seams. I couldn't find any holes, but there's a hole somewhere, and I think that's because of how I put it together. The vinyl adhesive works great if you have two surfaces that are touching all the way. As long as there's contact, they stick together. It seals it in really well. But once you start building a complex shape, you start to get these little folds and pieces that don't quite line up, and I think those tiny little folds are not getting glued together, and that's where the air is coming out. And that led me to this. This is a flat iron. It has something to do with fixing hair. I don't really know. I bought it several years ago for another project that I never did. And so this has literally been floating around my shop in the box for a long time. And since it was already here, I decided, well, maybe it's a good way to be able to clamp down on two pieces of plastic and melt them together. And it turns out it is. I turned it on to its lowest setting and then decided to just try to put a couple of pieces together. You squeeze it, hold it for about, I don't know, 5 seconds or so, and then when you take it out, it's completely melted together. And this is awesome for a lot of reasons. One, I already had it, so I don't have to pay for it again, but they're really cheap. And it's a perfectly good way to be able to clamp plastic together. And if you have those little folds like I was talking about, it just melts them together and gets rid of the hole. It's awesome. So I definitely want to try this on this gigantic pattern that we have right in front of us. I'm still going to end up using the glue though, because this will only go on sections that can be flipped inside out. I'm still going to have to glue the whole thing up to close it, and if there are any pinholes, I can patch them with the cement. Now again, this is clear material. It's really hard for you to see on camera, but trust me, there are two pieces that are very different sizes that have to stick together. So I'm going to use these little fabric clips and start trying to get the pieces lined up, and then we'll go back and melt it together, see how it turns out. I learned before that turning this thing inside out is actually kind of a problem, because if you crinkle it too much, those little sharp folds end up making pinholes in certain places. So I'm gonna take it outside and actually let it soften in the sun a little bit before I try to turn it inside out. I think that'll help. Certainly won't hurt. The seams on this thing are gonna be fine, but I'm a little bit worried about the material just kind of cracking and letting air out. So I'm worried it's gonna sink. But before we even put it in the water, find out what it can't do, let's find out what it can do. Can it clean up your shop? Yeah. Can it run on the treadmill? Nope. Can it hide the droids they're looking for? Yep. Can you use it as an umbrella? Absolutely. Can you use it as a desk? Not so much. Can you use it to annoy your kids? Most definitely. Can it play piano? Surprisingly, yes. Can it help you win at hide and seek? You got it. Can it open a portal through space and time in your own backyard? Huh. So it can do a lot more than I thought it could do, but what really matters is whether I can float on it, so we're gonna borrow my neighbor's pool. So far in this project, we know several things went right. The paint worked great. The adhesive worked great. The heat sealing worked great. The material, I'm not sure about yet. I think it's gonna pop a bunch of little tiny holes once I get on it. And in regards to the hot dog, I think the hot dog I made was the wrong size, so we're just gonna leave it out. I'm a much better size hot dog for this bun, so I'm just gonna lay on it. Oh, it totally works. This thing actually worked out really well. I just figured it would like start popping as soon as I got on it and start leaking, but I have not heard any bubbles, any little holes or anything. So I gotta say, I'm impressed and I'm happy with it. But now, we gotta go to the diving board and see what it can take. It didn't pop. Definitely taking on water. So before I go completely under, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Now it's time for Googles. Let's try to see if we can figure out what it, that's tough, that's a lot to say. In the same, oh no! Gosh. No, it's folding over. No, don't do that. No, don't do that. No, don't do that. I don't know why I always think these things are gonna be like reasonable to do. This is so weird.